13 years in, and it is all about uncovering the gems. Forget about whatever anybody's already talked about. Go beneath and then discover the unsung heroes merging all musics. I'm continuing to shine light on absolute heroes of music, guys like Peter Rowan and Bill Keith, who learned under the father of bluegrass, Bill Monroe, or cats like Calvin Keyes and Ernie Ellie, who played in the R&B circuit with Ray Charles. Maybe it's bassist Norbert Putnam riffing on what it was like to play in the studio with an original rocker like Elvis, or Peter Erskine's countless tales from his relentless tours with Stan Kenton. I'm trying to stretch the lineage of American music through stories of wisdom from those who have learned from the masters. My show has continued to bridge the musical gap between my elders and my contemporaries. My guest today is an example of someone who is determined to pass the music and his wisdom on to current and future generations of authentic seekers. He grew up in the Bay Area and was exposed to all different types of music and a lot of his elders on the bandstand. And he recognized that in a lot of ways, well, it's important to get your rudiments and know some academic parts of music. The oral tradition of blues and jazz is still the most salient. And he has done that with so many of my peers who really look up to this guy, not because he's, has monster chops or is trying to be somebody he's not, but he's really at the core, somebody who has huge ears, who recognizes the soul of the song and also understands that nothing is more important than the music and that his contributions will live on long after he's left this planet. Jim Campilongo, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hey, thanks a lot, Jake. I'm happy to be here.
It's an honor to have you, brother. I just wanted you to talk a little bit to the audience about were you an ear-trained musician to start before you learned to read music?
Um, yeah, I mean, everything was done pretty informally. Like, I never studied ear training. And when I learned guitar, I took lessons for about maybe a year. And from that point, it was just a jumping off point for me. So I'm not really a traditionally schooled musician. I read chord charts really well. It took me like 10 times longer than everybody else. Um, and I understand song form probably really well. Um, and, whatever, some voice leading, there's things I can do. I'm not a crack reader, nor did I ever have formal ear training.
Absolutely. No, no, I'm not talking about formal ear training. I'm just talking about learning music by ear.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I mean, sorry to interrupt.
no, go ahead, please,
Okay.
rip away. Yeah.
Um, Basically, like when I learned, was learning, and I had, Cream Live Spoonful was really a big thing for me, um,
Hmm.
and I'd slow it down to 16. Because there was those variables were on my turntable. It was 33 and a third, and the next one was 16, and it would change into a different key, you know, and it actually didn't help me too well.
Hmm.
I was never, there was a guy older than me in high school who was one of those guys. I remember he could play the solo from Grand Funk's Inside Looking Out Live,
Hmm.
like note for note. And it just blew me away. It was like somebody just reading the Dead Sea Scrolls verbally, in real time, And I was never really one of those guys. Like, I mean, I never could play Axis Bold as Love note for note or any of that.
Oh,
Before there was, transcriptions of it in Guitar World or whatever. But and I don't think you're implying that, but I wasn't like particularly gifted that way. Um, so,
well, no, I mean you had to. I think that more to the point, I just wonder if you could talk early on in your life, not even before your career started, is just I mean, it's cool to transcribe things, and like obviously, like in high school, you're like the cat's ripping off that solo note for note. But I just wanted you to talk to younger cats about a time early where you feel like your ears grew the most. It could have been listening to records. It could have been playing in your garage. It could have been on the bandstand. But ultimately, what's happening now at a sort of I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but when you were coming up, still, even in the mid '70s as a teenager, you had North Texas and you had Berkeley, and maybe a couple more schools. I mean, Howard University. Roberta Flack went there. They didn't teach her jazz. That was the devil's music. Now you have jazz schools all over the country, and you have a lot of kids coming into the academy that are learning to read before they're learning to hear the music. And as a result, their ears are locked, and they wound up coming out and sounding like their professors, which is one of my arguments to say that at least in melodic improvisation and jazz, that's why we have a homogenization of sound. It's hard to pick out who is what, as opposed to when you were coming up, George Van Epps versus Pat Martino versus Kenny Burrell versus John McLaughlin. You could tell right away who was playing. So I'm trying to figure out, maybe two-part question. Where did your ears grow the most on the bandstand? And no matter how much facility you had or didn't have, or how hard it was for you to just learn stuff, how important was it early on for you to cultivate your own individual sound as well?
Well, that always came a little naturally to me. It seemed like I would develop uh, motifs and ideas, and therefore it was like a certain style.
Hmm.
The other thing that really, like I remember learning like just thirds, okay? I mean, this is going to be really sophomoric, but something like, uh, can you hear that?
Oh, it sounds beautiful.
So I remember in high school, I started doing solos like, something like that, like, and and in E, and I kind of did that for about 3 months, maybe.
I love it, dude. I love it. Yeah.
And I learned them all over, and it was there's a recording of me somewhere on a cassette,
Hmm.
and I would consciously change things. I remember, again, I'll give an example on the guitar. I learned this, you know, and could play it because you kind of have to roll your fingers. It's that cliche, right?
Sure. Sure.
That one. But I didn't feel comfortable going, or to me, it felt like, saying, take my wife, please, or some joke that somebody already has said many, many times and everyone knows the punchline. So I remember coming up with, sorry, and I really like this, or, or, and I was coming up with things based on that lick, but not that lick.
I love it. That's exactly what I'm talking. Go ahead. Continue.
So, and I mean, it just took me a long time. And then when I was about 17 or 18, maybe a little older, um, Roy Buchanan came to town, and I liked his first couple records a lot. The Roy Buchanan, it's self-titled, and then Roy Buchanan's second record.
Right. It
I
was on
think it
was it
was
on
most
Polydor? Is it on Polydor or something?
Polydor. A
Yeah.
lot
Yeah.
of people, like the Alligator stuff or like his later Polydor records, but I think those first two records are the ones, the
Huh.
ones. And with all due respect to Roy. But anyway, I went to go see him, and in lieu of, answering your question finally, like since it was pre-internet and pre-instructional video and pre-everything, like, I had seen this guy in high school play Inside Looking Out,
Right. Right.
so to see someone just play was like mind blowing to me. Um, that, you know, I mean, he was on another level than I was at the time. I had seen BB King too, and that was really eye-opening. Um, like I saw how you know, his vibrato, for example. But I saw Roy, and many things were open to me based on seeing him play. Um, Tone swells, volume swells, a little behind the nut bending,
Oh, I
and
love this. Oh
and
yeah.
the other thing that a real takeaway at the time, and again, I'm kind of going to play the same old thing, but he didn't use vibrato that much. So, you know, some of his songs were like instead of, you know, like Mick
Right.
Ralph, the Bad Company, you know, and who's
Right.
a good player, but like a real, you know, I was doing like a really aggressive vibrato, and it almost was discomforting to me to see it like that. It was, you know, he was just plugged in a Fender through an amp, and he was like 3 feet away from me. And, you know, so I learned so many things. I learned about hybrid picking. Like I saw that he used some fingers on his right hand with his pick. You know, I just learned so much just because I could see it. And so that was really significant, to say the least.
You know, talking to Jim Campilongo here, already just on fire here on a Monday morning. But I wanted to. Do you, if you do have younger cats who come, because I just don't think, I think what you're talking about is this street scholar approach to blues rock and things like um, different kinds of finger picking styles that nobody criticized it per se because nothing was codified. I don't think you can codify or put in a curriculum like the ability to teach jazz or blues. And so you were sort of free to your own devices. There was none of this. And you know, today part of the issue is just we are saturated in visual material, not auditory material. So, and a lot of it is very mediocre. And so I just wonder with when kids come to you who might have had more of a pedigree or training and you know, do you feel like one of your gifts as a teacher is the ability to loosen them up and say, no, there is no right or wrong path. There is no exact way to do stuff. I mean, it's just that this younger generation is so hung up on perfection as opposed to feel. And I wanted you to talk about how you feel like if one of your responsibilities is to get those cats, if you run into them, to loosen up naturally.
Well, first off, like I don't necessarily agree that the younger players are overwhelmed by, you know, a ton of information and they're jack of all trades, master of none. And I'm not saying you just said that, but
It's
I
all
think
good.
they're,
Yeah. You
yeah,
know better than me.
I think they're excellent, and I think they're really well informed, and I think they're capable. And this is, we're both generalizing, and I'm generalizing. They're so informed, and I'm really impressed. Like they're way ahead of the game than I was when I was 25. Um, they know Django Reinhardt's style. They know the Freddie Green rhythm styles.
Right,
They
right.
probably know some Chet Atkins. They're not living in a void of how did BB King sound like BB King. Okay, and I think they're great, and I'm excited about, you know, their professionalism. Their the level that they're at is really impressive. I mean, I might even say like they have it tougher than I did because when I was learning and, you know, like learning my trade and my instrument, there were a million gigs. And if you could play like, you know, the Doobie Brothers, you know, song or whatever,
Yes.
China Grove, you know,
Yeah.
you know, or something like that, you know, you could have a gig. And I mean, I played a lot with a minimum of expertise. And I mean, I can't say like, I'm sure like Brian Setzer always sounded great, but didn't necessarily sound great on a lot of things. But I mean, it was very easy for me to play a Cars song, go duk, 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 and I played a ton of weddings, a ton of bars. Um, I mean, I played 3 times a week, easy. And I played like many Elks clubs. Like I was in this band that kind of played country. And and they did like the first set was like an accordionist we had, and then the next
Sure.
couple sets were, uh, country-esque music or Bad Bad Leroy Brown, that kind of thing. The top 40 of the day, which in some cases is still the top 40. So I could do that, and I think that younger musicians don't have that advantage, and they also aren't making a ton of money getting their music out there. Like, it's how many likes do you have on Instagram or whatever. Now, some people attain it success through that, but it is a little more dismal. Now, I do find on the other end of the spectrum, I was lucky enough to teach at a jazz school in Italy a few years back.
Whoa.
And um, what I noticed was some the the kids that studied in this jazz school, and they kind of fetishized American, United States jazz more than we do, and that's another subject, and I hope I don't forget it.
No. We're going to go into that because the Europeans and Japanese, they consume the music that we sort of neglect here, you know?
Well, I think we take it for granted, and sometimes it works to our advantage. But these kids, and I call them kids because they're like 22,
Right.
they had an overflowing toolbox. Like they had every tool. They had magnetic, screwdrivers. They had, I don't know tools that well, but the most nerdy tool, like if I'm going to give a metaphor, they had. But they weren't, a lot of them, and I'm not saying this is all young people, but they weren't schooled or taught how to tell a story. Like, if I go with the metaphor, it's like these guys had a gazillion tools, but they weren't sure how to make a shelf, and
Wow. That
sometimes
is intense right there.
I find that like guys know every scale, every mode, they're pretty well informed, but their storytelling is a little neglected. And I think I can't disagree with that, method of like, okay, well, this is the harmonic minor, and you play it up a half step from on the 5 chord, and it's this scale, and Wes Montgomery used it. But it's harder to teach someone, well, how do you tell a story? Like, I mean, I find that the more interesting musicians, and I'm sure there's examples that, are contrary to this, are interesting people. Like that they tell a fairly good story. Now I'm self-conscious because I've been talking so long, but
Well, first of all, Campilongo, you are on. This is so. I want to go back for a second. This is so important,
yeah,
and I want to go back to the analogy of the toolbox overflowing with tools, unable to build a shelf. And
but
I
that's
just want to ask you: is that a direct result of? Here's the bottom line. You nailed it. It's a supply and demand issue we have today. The younger cats are completely knowledgeable. They know the history. They know where the sounds come from. They don't have places to play, not just, but so they can't play in a conversational band, which ultimately helps you grow your own sound. So my question is, because cats are playing in isolation and learning all this stuff that came before them, they can't build the shelf because they are not playing in conversational music with other people
well, possibly. I mean, I also think that,
consistently. Yeah.
you could learn like, the harmonic minor and, its applications, but nobody's going, okay, well, say something. Now, one thing I do, as a teacher, when people are at a level where I'm like, okay, well, they kind of know everything. And I tell people, like, Link Ray was a great artist. And Link Ray played D to E. Like
Right.
sometimes knowledge puts off the work of, okay, now I've got to build a shelf. Um, so I tell them, and this may seem weird, but I say, okay, what's the sound of humiliation? Like, and there's no wrong answer. I mean, if somebody went, and I'm grabbing the guitar again, if somebody went like this, I'd be like, okay,
Hmm.
I mean, there's
Yeah,
no
I
wrong
did. Yeah.
answer. To
Yeah.
me, this is more the sound of humiliation. What's the sound of sadness? What is the sound of heartbreak? What is the sound of joy? What is the sound of jumping up and down on your bed, with exuberance? And I mean, that's when they're at a certain level. Like if a guy can't play a G scale, I'm not going to bust his chops with that. But when people are fairly good and they have that toolbox, those are the questions I ask them. The other thing I ask is, and this is me on a bad night sometimes, but if I kind of got nothing, I'll think, well, what would I want to hear if I was in the audience?
Hmm.
And I'll play that. But these are conversations I have, and I'm not saying I've arrived or anything, but that would be my response. Like, and I would try to not demonize too much information. I do think like playing live a bunch of gigs taught me a lot. But by the same token, like staying at home and woodshedding like was probably more beneficial than playing You're Cheating Heart, like, and just moving the pentatonic scale down from where, to the major pentatonic scale. Like I did learn by playing that gig. A keyboard player did a gig with us. It was a band called Country Breeze. And
I
we did,
love
we
this.
played, we played like 3 times a week for a number of years. And he came and I heard that he was playing over the changes, where I was playing a little bit more like the Allman Brother, like
Right,
Richard Betts
right,
style.
right,
Okay.
right.
And I thought, yeah, that's pretty good. I got it. And then I heard him and again, hadn't heard Buck Owens or Merle Haggard with, Roy Nichols or Buddy Emmons yet. Um, but I did learn, and so it was conversational and it was like scholastic for sure. Um, but
And there were, this is so. There's a couple things that came up. The idea of play me. Once you get some cats that are versed and ready, they technically they get it, and you're tapping into what's humiliate. Give me something that sounds like humiliation to you. Give me something that sounds like laughter, jumping on your bed. You're talking about extracting emotive qualities from them to for them to be able to sort of begin to sort of what's your story, so to speak, right? I mean, it's about telling a story through your apparatus. Is that what your mindset is in terms of trying to draw out that emotive quality once they have the rudiments in place?
yeah, I mean, for sure. For example, on a negative note, and I'm very reluctant to be negative, um, not because I'm not a negative person. I mean, I think we're all doomed, but
Yeah, yeah. I mean, dude, you have to
um,
be yourself. I mean, and we
but
all are who
that,
we are,
that's exactly my point. Is
Yeah.
it made it harder for me, um, and I would go see bands, and let's say the name of the guitarist was Joey, okay, because I don't want to name anybody
Sure.
specifically. Okay, so I go see Joey, and Joey's playing like basically the correct idiom and all the traditional licks within that idiom, fairly proficiently. And my thought would be, well, where's Joey? I don't hear
Exactly.
Joey.
Yes.
Now, that said, I remember in my early 20s and all I listened to, I mean, I listened to a lot of different stuff, but for like a year, I listened to Muddy Waters on chess. I mean,
Wow.
all
Wow.
day, every day. I loved how it was between a swing and a straight beat, and I loved the way Muddy played. I loved everything about it. And, I could play kind of some of those songs, and I definitely could play like what I considered an adequate, like Albert B.B. King style. And a local guy who was really good, his name was Bird Hale. I don't know if he's still around, and it kind of ends in a diss, but I did the gig with him and and I thought I played fine, and it was all blues. He played harmonica, it was like Little Walter songs, and I had boned up on my endings,
Hmm.
da 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 da, so there wasn't like a train wreck. And I did the gig, and at the end of the gig, I mean, and I thought I did pretty well. He came up to me and he was like, he said it was some kindness to make it clear, but he goes, Jim, have you ever heard the blues? And it
Whoa.
really hurt me. But a guy in Buenos Aires, a good friend of mine, Rafa, just told me last visit, and I said, yeah, I just put out my new record, She Loved the Coney Island Freak Show, and he heard it, okay, I'm kind of going on and on, but I have to make this point.
Keep riffing, baby. Yeah.
Okay, I have 16 solo records. Now, I started asking myself, does the world need, 10 Jim Campilongo records? Um, I really love two Roy Buchanan records. I have two Danny Gatton records. I have
Wow.
one Joe
Wow.
Satriani record. I mean, and I maybe have like five Wes Montgomery records, maybe seven or eight Django Reinhardt records. Okay, on and on and on. But once in a while, I try and nail the artist, meaning I'll get every record. That's my goal. Um, but I decided that I needed to strategize my records in that it was something different. Now, it may go in one ear and out the other, somebody who listens to me or doesn't know me, but I did this record called Last Night This Morning, and it was like a studio record. Then I did, I'm getting the chronological order might be off, but then I did a duet record with this guy, Luca Benedetti. It's called Two Guitars. And then I put out a live record, which was like a post-apocalyptic trio, and so I strategize what my records are going to be. And so to finally come to my point, I told my friend Rafa in Buenos Aires, and I just talked to him this morning, and I know he loves me, I love him. I said, I'm thinking about doing some kind of jazz record if I do another record. Um, and I want to do Nancy with the Laughing Face, maybe around midnight, you
Mm.
know.
Mm.
And I said, and I'll do it on a telly and I'll do it Jim style. And he goes, Jim, no matter what style you play, people who play that style are going to be pissed off at you. And it's kind of true. Like, again, and this is in reference to me having my own style. Like,
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
it's a little easier if your idol is Marty Stewart, and I name him because he's really great,
Yeah.
and you emulate him and play country like him, as opposed to playing country like I did in the Little Willies. Um, or playing rock as I play rock, or blues as I play blues, and having Bird Hale ask me if I've ever heard this stuff. So there is a price to pay for having a unique style and not showing up and being able to exhibit perfect Wes Montgomery, perfect B.B. King, perfect Django Reinhardt.
Why you've been on this planet longer than myself. I think Joe Pass and Herb Ellis and all the Barney Kessel, they'd laugh people out of the room. They wanted the Jim Campilongos. They did not want this purity test. I mean, for so long in folk music, you had to go through certain school, or you had to go through this kind of pedigree in order to be considered a true folk musician, going back to the early mid 60s. And then all of a sudden, they start finding all these hillbillies out in the middle of rural America who could burn up the bandstand. And all of a sudden, they were like, well, these guys are just as valid as whatever we thought the folk aesthetic was. I mean, how have we gotten to this point where it's like, it's about you're going to piss people off because you're not adhering to the exact note for note or style of some person that was never. I mean, David Garibaldi, who I'm sure you must have seen Tower of
Tower of
Power.
Power.
All right. He said that when he would be playing gigs, if somebody came up to him and said, again, think about that time, Gaylord Birch, Bill Vitt, Greg Orico, Michael Shreve, David Garibaldi, on and Bill Kreutzmann, on and on and on. Garibaldi said if somebody came up to him and said, man, you sounded great. You sounded just like Sam Lay. He'd want to slit his wrists. That was the late 60s. In your mind, just your opinion, there's no right or wrong answer. How have we gotten to this point where Campilongo is getting grief? Because I'm telling you, you have basically decided, you know what? I know people might get pissed off and I don't care. But for so many younger cats, growing up at a time when there aren't as many live bandstand opportunities to kind of become a street scholar, they will then conform to what the crowd says. And I just wonder how we went so far from be yourself and burn to, man, that dude's not playing it the right way.
Well, that's a good point, and I think about that. I'm not there's I have an answer too. Well, it hasn't hurt me because I'm 66 years old and I'm still kind of doing it.
Yeah.
Um, I'm proof that having a style, and that's probably my main strength. I mean, as you mentioned in your lovely intro, I'm not a shredder, not really.
Oh,
Um, but I have my own sound, and that's been an appreciated thing to some degree. I've made 16 records and I have my own style and I've made a career. Okay, so I've been paid off. It hasn't been all an uphill battle of people booing after a country
no,
solo.
I dig. But I mean, just going
No,
back to your
just to
friend.
make, you aren't
Yeah.
saying that, just to make it
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah.
But I also, and for fear of being like Bill Maher or some like crabby old fuck who like, isn't informed. Like, dude, I don't go out, that much and see young bands. But when I go to like Home Depot or whatever and I hear new music, and when I hear some artists I know that are big artists that put out records, sometimes I think, oh, it's the invisible solo. Like it's a guitar solo, but it's kind of invisible to my ears.
Oh, yeah.
And the music, it used to be, and I'm gonna just really go for it,
Do it. Yeah.
like an intro going, and I just quickly did that. Like would be commercial because it would pop out of the radio. Like,
Exactly.
I mean, Marty Robbins has a tune that I can't, don't worry about me, I think it's called. And a lot of the 60s country stuff and the Beatles and whoever, like having some kind of attention demanding sound was commercial. But for some reason, I don't think that's as viable now. It is to me, but I would make a point
Yeah.
that, well, it's in movies too. Like, I mean, there used to be The Conversation, Jaws, which was I mean, not a great example. Like the movies in the 70s, a lot of them had like unhappy endings, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and now, like, I watch some movies, and again, there's good movies out there. Um, but I'll just hear the music. Like the first 10 seconds, it'll be like boop, 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 boop. And the guy's like driving his car, you know? And I'm
Right.
like, oh, this is excuse my language, but this is Hollywood bullshit. I'm not watching it, you know? And it might be Liam Neeson's daughter gets kidnapped, but he got out of prison and he's trying to make it straight now, but he's a total badass, you know? And
Yeah,
it's
I
like
get. Yeah.
real cookie cutter, man. And I think we could easily say that, well, movies cost $250 million. And right now, the thing's in a state of chaos. But let's say 5 years ago, you know, before everyone was pirating stuff and you had to pay 10 streaming services to see what people talk about at parties. You know, oh, it's on
Right.
Apple Plus. Oh, it's
Right.
on Paramount. I mean, it's that way with sports. But
Exactly.
movies now cost 250 million bucks, so they're going to make, you know, Hulk 4 or Spider-Man 7 or Spider-Man meets Hulk, and movies like The Conversation or Mr. Goodbar or some like crazy movie, or a movie as entertaining as The Sting. You know, like I went back and I watched The Sting, and this happens quite a bit. I'll think, oh yeah, I kind of liked that movie when it came out. I haven't seen it since. I'll check it out again, and I'll be like, at the end, I'll watch it and I'll go, oh my God, this is a masterpiece. You know,
Wow.
and at the time, I just thought, oh yeah, it was good. Um, so movies are that way too. So I don't know if we should, you know, I don't know. It's just a phenomenon that I have noticed. I can't bet for certain
It's
that,
okay.
you
No, you
know,
know what it is? I think also I flashed on this when you said it. This I remember when I did my first interview with John Densmore, and he was talking about Jack Holtzman with Elektra. You know, that was really a boutique label, and there were bean counters present, but the bean counters in the late 60s were like, a band like the Doors is, we're in the black with them. We're making music. So we don't understand their methodology. We don't understand their teamwork. We don't necessarily even know the music, but we're going to stay out of their way because they're making us money. And then, you know, by 76 or even the late 70s, you had things come into the studio like the efficiency model, obviously a lot of electronic drum machine kind of stuff. But most importantly, it became the bean counters getting involved with the actual creation of the art itself. And at that point, you get what you refer to as cookie cutter, or like where the Solo and Home Depot just, you can't even feel it. It's so opaque and it goes right through you. It's just music now on a big level where you would at first, like you said, Beatles or some kind of distortion guitar that would stand out. Now it's really made for pacification. I remember David Spinoza told me in the mid 70s, I don't know, he was in the studio maybe or wherever he was, and he overheard somebody say, "Hey, this is great music to talk over." And he's like, when the hell would that ever happen? Why do you want to talk over music? And it still happens today with me when I'm out, and I generally keep to myself because I like to do a lot of tribal orchestration and really be hyper focused on giving that energy back to the band. But I mean, there are certain artists who would prefer people talking incessantly than having a fanatic like Jake Feinberg bringing serious energy to the bandstand. It's a remarkable, just sort of change. And I think that regardless of, the truth is somewhere in the middle, but I just wonder about, I wanted to just go back for a minute and ask you about, it, were you going to I can't remember, was it Charlie's Saloon? I'm trying to think about the venues. Like Mahavishnu Orchestra was still like in 75. When were you first starting to sort of go see
well, I
uh
saw, I mean, probably when I was 14, so that's like 1973 or 4.
yeah.
Um, I mean, some of it, I never saw Hendrix. I saw the Mahavishnu Orchestra, but the Visions of Emerald Beyond tour. And I mean, I know this is a cliche, but it changed my life,
Now
you
explain, was
know?
it Narda was on drums with, was
Right,
that,
right.
yeah, right.
And they
What was,
were
so what, how did it change your life?
they were opening for Jeff Beck at the time, and I saw Jeff Beck numerous times. But I never. I mean, it just. blew, I mean, it was so profound that, I mean, I realized like how much work I had to do, but I also realized like how important music was. Now, I mean, I think some of it, like, is due to that, like, people have like 50,000 songs or 500,000 songs they could listen
Right.
to. Um, I mean, music's not that important as it was. I mean, go watch Woodstock, the movie, and I mean, it's just a much different time. Like people were on drugs a lot, but they were very open. I mean, I remember like seeing Sly and I would just watch Woodstock again, and Sly and the Family Stone were amazing. Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young were, I mean, Crosby, Stills and Nash pre-Young were really good. Um, it was Hendrix. Some of the bands, I mean, Jefferson Airplane, I thought was horrible. Like,
No, wait, wait,
like,
wait. Santana was all right, right? Santana
oh,
did all right.
Santana was
Yeah.
fantastic. And you
Yeah.
mentioned Mike Shreve in your opening.
Oh my God,
Like,
my hero, dude.
yeah, me too. I saw him play. I actually played with him once.
What?
But yeah, yeah, it's a long story, but I played with him
Oh,
up in
we got to make
Seattle.
sure we vet that at some point.
Yeah, it was like a Pearl Jam curated thing. Um, sorry, I just got a text.
It's all
Um,
right.
um, I just want to make sure your listeners aren't running to their phone. But it was amazing how great the audience was.
Right.
And like the music represented a celebration of their culture. The music represented their politics. The music represented so much, and some of the bands were really fantastic. And on the other side of the coin, some of the bands were like horrible. I thought Jefferson Airplane, I thought was like horrible, and I really dig White Rabbit, and I think Yorma Kakowin is like a super cool dude. You know,
Absolutely, dude. I mean, maybe they had a
like
bad, maybe they had a bad, they were off on that gig or something. Who
yeah,
knows?
I mean, but they were allowed to be off.
Yes. Yes.
Like
Yes.
yeah, and I'm glad we got to that point because I just don't want to diss them. It was like complete acceptance. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately is a listener, because I write this column for Guitar Player magazine called Vinyl Treasures, and I write it every month. And basically, I could pick any record and write about it. Um, and, I've been doing it for 8 years. So, I have a lot of columns, a lot of records. And anyway, I wrote about the Germs first record, and I really, really went through this Germs thing. And it made me think about the Shags. Have you heard the Shags?
No.
Okay, they were this all girl band. Um, look, I'm gonna find them on YouTube real quick.
Yeah. Send me something.
Yeah, or here, let me Shags. Good. Now check this out. I don't know what this is. Sorry, YouTube decided to play something else
It's
there.
all right. No, I mean, yeah.
Okay, so that's worth
Thanks.
1,000 words. Now, they sound kind of like, I mean, they're kind of horrible, but I had their CD, and the more I listened to it, the more I really liked it. And
Really?
yeah, there's something organic about it and real, and I just accepted it instead of going like, wow, they sound like they're in two different rooms and the drum. Um, and I ordered the record, and I happened to have like a girlfriend over when I got it, and I was like, oh, I got this record, and I put it on, and after about a song and a half, she became enraged, like, and she wasn't like that wasn't typical of her. Like,
Hmm.
and she finally said, like, unless you take this music off, I'm leaving. Like, she was enraged.
What is
And
going? I mean, that is a serious response.
yeah, well, I could understand it. And so, And I could understand that if people were listening to the Germs, okay? Um, to some degree, it's not as, chaotic as the Shags. The Shags made a couple hundred records. Evidently, their father was forcing them to be a band, during the Beatles, and, he thought that they sounded great. And Frank Zappa, of all people, discovered it and kind of brought it into the mainstream enough to where I'm talking about it now to you, Jake. Um, but my point is like, and again, I'm sorry it's taking me so long, but about a month or so ago, my friend and drummer on my record, longtime friend Dan Reeser, saw free jazz. And I remember he's going, "Yeah, I'm going to go see this free jazz thing tonight," and I mean, he described it and it sounded like bonk, pa 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 pa, beep ba boo ba ba, like that kind of thing, like real crazy free
Yeah,
jazz.
odd metered. Yeah, out, out.
Just out. Okay. So, and it was like a small venue, and he was friends with like the drummer, and he sat in the front row, and he said, like, by the second song, I just so wanted to run out of there. And like, I was angry. But he stayed the whole set, and we talked about how any emotion is good. Like, even if it's anger, like, it's the music is at least making you angry. And, obviously, like, you want to feel love or joy, or, you listen to Motorhead, Ace of Spades, and, your adrenaline, starts pumping. And that's a positive experience. But there's also other experiences that I think I'm open and I will accept. And that ties in with Jefferson Starship at Woodstock. Is
Right.
like I'm accepting it. Now, if I go see a top 40 band in a bar that pretty much doesn't exist anymore, at least here in San Francisco, like, are they going to play Joan Jett, I Love Rock and Roll, and then Twist and Shout, and then, a bad version of Hotel California, and then, like, I don't want to hear that.
No.
Like, but it gives people permission, kind of like the invisible solo. Like, oh, it's I Love Rock and Roll by Joan Jett, played by these four dudes, and I'm going to have a shot, another shot, and it's Friday night. It's just like really
A hunt. No,
mediocre.
it also, but I don't know. I just wanted to piggyback on that by saying that uh, where Jefferson Airplane was allowed to hit clams and suck, and try to develop their own original stuff. And the Dead were like this too. I mean, the Dead, David Nelson told me for many years in mid '60s Warlocks time, he'd sit behind the stacks, PA stacks, and when the Dead would stop playing top 40 music and go into their one original long kind of blues jam, everybody would be heading for the exits. Um, in droves. And in some ways today, but eventually they got better and better at it and developed a following. And today it just seems to me like people come, they want predictability, and they want to know what is they don't there is. And the problem with that, and the one reason that I really have a lot of respect for you in general, is just because you're not like freaking a lot of these heavyweight cats, the incredible jazzers, the Kessels, the passes, and the people like that. But you've been longing for improvisation, and improvisation just in general means spontaneity, unpredictability, and that to me gets to a level of higher art than just playing something formulaic so somebody can say, oh yeah, I'm going to go take another shot, I know this too. Who wants to hear that? Who wants that?
Well, so I mean, evidently people do want to hear it.
No, evidently they
Um,
do. There's a lot of people that do. Yeah.
I mean, and so there's that. There's the audience, like, who maybe isn't as accepting as they were in 1968 at Woodstock. like allowing Jefferson Airplane just to be themselves that particular day. Um, but that said, like I almost have to fight my natural inclination to be interesting because I really love Chet Atkins. I really love 60s country music.
Sure.
Um, and so I have like one eye on the audience more than I want to sometimes. Like I wish I could go out and go bump bump ba da da, beat it, like I won't do that. And I appreciate the bravery of it if people do it with love and not like, yeah, we're going to alienate the audience, man. We're cool, And I don't think people do that I know. But it's tricky because you are an entertainer,
Right. Right.
too. And sometimes like people are bitter about their draw and I don't know. I mean, have you seen footage of WC Fields juggling shoe boxes? It's on YouTube. It's pretty obscure.
I gotta see that. That is
Dude,
insane.
it's friggin' fantastic. Like, and I mean, he has like this, I'm sure it's built in an urgency of like, I've got to eat tonight.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. The burn. You had to burn to get through that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And and I mean I can't say Jefferson Airplane did that, but it's so complicated. Like, well, what about that? Like if you're bitter that a club pays you $50 and eight people came and six are on the guest list, like I don't think you should be bitter and you should wonder about what are you offering, too. So it's very complicated, you know. Um, I mean, I don't expect people to like, come in droves to hear the free jazz Dan Reeser was talking about, but it was to make a point about acceptance. And like, I accept the Shags, and I'm not saying that makes me better than somebody who listens to Joan Jett. And man, I've been listening to nothing but Motorhead lately. I think they're
Right.
really exciting. I mean, potato chips are great, and so is a milkshake. I
Right.
mean, it's not like a steady diet I'd want or benefit from, but one has to take responsibility too. And that gets back full circle to the kids graduating from the numerous music schools. And are they showing up in the same clothes they wore that day? Are they connecting to the audience? Are they
Mm.
being funny? Like, I mean, Miles Davis was great. He turned his back and, rock out. And it's still like some of my favorite music. So it's very complicated. But, these are all questions one should consider, and we're considering, and I'm enjoying talking about them.
Really, this is truly what my show is about. It's very hard. I'm not a musician, so I don't like to. I mean, I definitely can't get in the weeds theory wise. I can hear stuff. I just want to go back to the Shags. You did more than just accept them. You started to dig it, and you dug it because you started listening to it because of the raw punk authenticity of the music. Is that right? I mean, basically, they were being their honest selves.
Well,
Maybe,
that's all true, Jake, but I would
yeah.
just say it was stimulating.
It got you off.
Yeah, I mean, it feels good,
Yeah.
like I
Well, that's
mean,
the most important thing. It's got to feel. No one's going to remember. You might get off this conversation and say, "What the hell did I just talk about?" But the feeling is good, right?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I won't think that.
yeah.
This was way different than I thought it would be.
Oh yeah, yeah. We're going out. Yeah,
And I'm digging it.
yeah.
It's not all about me promoting my t-shirts, but that's cool.
And you know what? It's just it's so. I'm so glad you said that because so many times heavy cats will be like, "Hey, can we wait till my new album comes out?" And I'm just like, "Dude, it's not about promote. This is not about that." But go ahead, continue. Yeah.
Well, so yeah, I mean, I just like it, and the more I listen to the Shags, the more I found it like, oh, I know what I'm getting here. Like I mean, at a restaurant, like the key is that they keep their dishes consistent. So if you got a hamburger or sea bass, it's the same the next time you go there. And the shags are like that to me too. Like I've heard them enough to where, oh yeah, I know what I'm in for, and it's stimulating and it feels good. I mean, I may not sit in my living room with headphones on and listen to them, but
Yeah.
I don't
No, I
really
dig
do
it,
that.
man. I dig it.
Yeah.
You want to get fire. You want to get some stimulation, and then. But I mean, it is. Can you talk about? Um, I'm just interested, also very much like um you know, we'll get into this later, but some guys that have been very influential, that have paid you a lot of respect, are like kind of like sacred, dear spirit brothers to me now in my life, and you know, the road dog experience today is ruthless in the sense that, um, if you're lucky enough to go on tour, you really can't really bring roadies. You're basically, setting up all your gear, tearing it all down. And the gigs, the thing is this, the gigs do not pay anymore. It's, oh, you have your merch table. You can sell the merch. But the cats aren't really making a lot of money off the gig themselves. And I wanted you to just sort of talk about an early road dog experience, because I mean, I've talked to cats. I don't care if they grew up in the Bay Area, or they did the Wyoming, Salt Lake City, Idaho circuit, or whatever it was. Um, they'd be put up. You'd have accommodations. That you got paid for the gigs, and because of the cost of living, you were able to get ahead. So it's just become such a daunting task as the vice grip of what you mentioned earlier. We are doomed as the darkness, as we keep slipping into darkness here. The gears, the vice keeps getting tighter. I just wanted you to more than just the opportunity to play live and have a. Can you talk about an early road dog experience that was seminal for you? Just ultimately how it shaped you as a leader and as a better person and player.
Well, I might not be answering the question, but I think I am.
That's all
And
right.
you mentioned like John Densmore and Electra,
Right.
okay? And Electra signed the doors. You have spoken to the guy, John Densmore. My impression, as just someone who's read about them, like was that Electra kind of signed him sight unseen, like like yeah, we need some hip rock bands and this stuff selling. And
Absolutely.
and then they were supported by the record label. And that kind of ties in with like my empathy for younger musicians because there are no labels anymore. Now, I did one, to answer your question, I think I did a road dog tour with an artist named Martha Wainwright. And I think it was like
Wow.
one of the last I can't remember the name of the label, but it was the same label Robert Plant and Alison Krauss were on. They made
Sure.
that great record. Forgot what it's called, and they made a ton of money. It was like right when before Napster and Spotify and iTunes on Apple, everything just owned music, and it was all about streaming. And they had a bundle of money, so they supported Martha. And we had, a tour bus. We had a couple roadies. I had 2 amps. Somebody set it up. Somebody would restring my guitar. We'd basically stay in hotels, sometimes just on the bus. And, I traveled like all through the UK, Ireland, Scotland, like all over, and did it for about a year and a half. And it was great, but we had a label like supporting us.
Was it called?
And
Pheromone?
the label,
Yeah, Phero. I'm just trying to
no,
look at the.
it was a
Yeah.
different label, and they were well known. I can't think of it. If you Google, I mean, unless I'm remembering, like Alison Krauss, Robert Plant, same label. It's a well-known
Hmm.
label. I don't know if they're around anymore. But okay, so there was that. And it was like they were making a ton of money like the labels, especially back in the 60s when Electro was putting out stuff. And I don't know if they were a subsidiary of a bigger label, making a ton of money and signing bands just to have a tax write off and all that. But
Exactly.
okay, but the other side of the coin is I put out my first record in 94 or 95, and it was a real sweet spot. And I made my own CD, and there was distribution. I got distribution. It was in Tower and Virgin, and I basically made non danceable, weird country swing instrumental music, kind of based on Jimmy Bryant and Speedy West,
Wow.
but came out of my interpretation of it. And it started my career. And I don't think a label would have touched me. Like I have a career because of that. Like
Right.
it's okay. And it had nothing to do with major labels. So because I was foregoing the big label machine, I created more, and for lack of a better word, a grassroots career. But now there's not that. There's no Tower Records, there's no Virgin Records, there's still an Amoeba. Everybody has 500,000 songs. Like, I mean, it's just,
Well, and
it's,
it's also like it's like you said, the dissemination of it, and the so you. Well, I'm sorry. What year was the instrumental country Speedy West record?
like
94.
1995, 1994,
Right.
something
That
like
was. I
that.
mean, if you go back, you know this better than anybody. I've interviewed guys like Tony Mason. Haven't gotten to Andy Hess yet, but those guys were in the studio scene in New York. There was. I mean, I am obsessed with the studio scene in New York. Not not in the 60s. I mean, I love that period when Rainey and Cornell Dupree and Purdy were there, but even before that in the 50s when it was like everything was churning in the studios. In the 90s there was still a lot of work in the studios as well on top of distribution, and so that was the last. And I was a junior in high school at that time, and then after that, by the late 90s, turn of the century, um, the record companies had totally consolidated everything and there was nothing left. And it all became streaming. And now you get to a point when you get 14,000 downloads and you get a check for $6. It's really a very perverted. And this is a philosophical question for Brother Campilongo, is because I need you to kind of put your own career aside for a minute,
Hmm.
but you can also, because what I've been maintaining, and I'm going to continue to do it as long as I can continue on this path, is um, when you were coming up, in my mind, even before that, uh, a musician was seen as a viable profession in our culture. It was never easy, but Wes Montgomery would walk down the street in New York, and if he saw somebody with their instrument in their hands, he'd stop them and talk to them for a minute. There were gigs, like you said, everywhere. Even if you weren't somebody that was locked into the studio scene, people. I mean, Schofield, Vinnie Colaiuta, all these cats never graduated Berkeley because there was so much work. Music was seen as a viable profession. So my question is, in today's world, is a musician still seen as a viable profession in this country, or have we gotten so far astray that the pervasive thought of, oh, music is a musician's gift to the world, or you can play for the door, or you can pay to play? It's never been easy, but is a musician still seen as a viable profession in our country?
Well, again, that's a really good question, and I think and I talk about this, but I have to preface it with I don't want to be like Bill Maher. Like
You're
I don't
not Bill
want to.
Maher, dude. You're not even close to, dude.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah,
snark
but
with
like
you, man.
being
Yeah,
as it was all better 30 years ago, but I live in Beverly Hills, have a limo driver, and I'm a trillionaire. But that
right.
said, to answer your question, no, I don't think like being a musician is as respected as it was
Right.
25 years ago. And I think about that a lot.
That's a really
Um,
interesting point. It's not even,
now,
because you're even
but
talking about like
we're talking about the United States because
absolute, and you're
I'm
talking
going to
20, yeah.
well, and that's my experience, but Buenos Aires isn't like that. Like Buenos Aires, people still go out, they still really dig music, they're really open for it, and they get it. Now, I don't expect anybody to kiss my ass because I tell them I play guitar, but it isn't like now people seem in the US seem more excited about the new iPhone or the Netflix series. And I think some of it's post COVID, it got exaggerated. But, and I also wonder if these competition shows, like, the world's greatest singer or whatever they're called,
Oh, oh
and
my
they,
God.
and they show people that want to make it and are euphoric and crying when they're chosen as number one, and they kind of sing that, letting air out of a balloon style of vocalizing, you know, um, you
Yeah,
know,
I dig.
and it's like that's what people see. They don't realize that like a lot of musicians are like, you know, artists. They're painters.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a combination of things. Like one, people have, man, 500,000 songs is an underestimation. Like 2 million songs at their disposal. Like they're excited about the new Apple Gizmo or app. Um, and people are a little more addicted to comfort, like where I'm going to stay in and watch Netflix part seven of whatever series instead of I'm going to go out in a crowded room and I can't smoke cigarettes. Um, Sex might kill me,
Hmm.
and and I better, and dude, I'm not glorifying any of this. Like I quit smoking, and again, I'm really being like Bill Maher. If I, young people are probably having sex like crazy. I hope so. But even going out is a little less dangerous, for lack of a better word, than it was 25 years ago. So I think there's a lot of factors about people's perception of music. But do you go out a ton? I don't.
Well, no, it's so funny you bring this up. It's a lot going on in my head. I would say that, especially coming out of COVID, um, aside from going on the road and communing with my favorite bands, locally where I live in Tucson, I do try to get out as much as possible because I was in psychotherapy for many years. I mean, and it was very good. I recommend it to anybody. But at a certain point, I talked myself out of it. And the only thing that really heals me now is rhythm. Rhythm to me is the salvation of our people. I mean, I don't, in Buenos Aires maybe, or definitely in Europe, musicians are still valued, and they don't have. It's not a game of Russian roulette. I mean, the government subsidizes a lot of clubs in Europe. The bottom line is not ferocious. They understand that music is a vital part of the culture. And so, like, I remember interviewing Cooch, Danny Korchmar, and he's just like, music used to dictate our culture. And you were talking about that, Sly Stone, White Rabbit, the all the Coltrane stuff. There was a social justice component to the anguished cries of the music, especially from the black jazzers. That just doesn't exist anymore. It is all sort of, let's make a hit, let's do something vanilla,
Well,
and
there is rap. There is rap.
no, then that is a legitimate folk music. I'm just saying my daughters are exposed to all kinds of music on vinyl, all sorts of stuff, weird, angular stuff, early 70s, that, and the other. And yet their ears still are more used to. quantized rhythm, electronic beats, just up and straight up and down. And that's the thing about Campilongo and the generation you come from, is that there was still this opportunity to, like you said, it's not, you don't necessarily play dance music, but I think, any music is made for dancing. And there was still this individual streak that even within the industry, that allowed things to breathe and get some exposure. Whereas now it is really, and also the other thing about these, voice, the voice or the whatever, the stars and all this stuff, it's like, it's all about, all I hear is just vocals. There is no focus on the accompanists. The idea, that's the magic of music. That's when I first started getting into music, well before I started the Jake Feinberg show. I mean, it was finding a Pat Martino record, turning it over, and seeing the accompanists on the record, that it turned out to be this trio from Philadelphia called Catalyst. And I'm like, wait a minute, here's this Italian cat playing with these three black dudes, and they're playing this absurd fusion music, and it's burning my eyeballs are dancing. And this was going on, and I mean, I'm not trying to glorify it, but then you read the notes, and it was just this, and then the communal listening part of it. And you're absolutely right. Mothers Against Drunk Driving had a lot to do with the decline of live music and the ability
Well, and rightfully so,
and rightfully so, and rightfully
like,
so. And so people are more comfortable in their surround sound systems watching a Netflix series, as opposed to going out like I did last night and burning with some of the most ferocious musicians, having a freaking ball, and doing covers, but doing everything from Butterfly to Sade to modern stuff, and just smiling ear to ear. And these are top flight dudes, and yet none of them are making more than $100 on that gig.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I prefaced this with people post-COVID are more addicted to comfort.
that
And
you're nailing it. That's true.
yeah, I mean, it's a way I look at myself. Like, and many days I think if I do everything I don't want to do today, I'll have a good day.
Hmm. Wow. Pushing
Yeah,
yourself out of your comfort zone. I love it.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, hey,
and more rewarding.
we've been cooking here for 75 minutes. Do you think we could maybe do part two in a week or two? Is that possible?
Sure, sure,
We got
sure.
more to do. I got more things to talk about, but and I appreciate you bringing your wisdom and your knowledge to the table. We're all the same. We're all the same. We're all just people. And all I'm going to say is this in closing. My two of my closest friends, really coming out of COVID, I've gotten super close with both of them. Are guys that hold you in the highest regard, and that's John Lee Shannon and Zephaniah O'Hora. And
Oh man, wow, those guys. Yeah,
I want to spend next session talking about your experiences with them, because they are like, they are the most. I mean, John Lee especially. Both of them are. I mean, Zeph just had another kid. He's busy, but he don't. John Lee Shannon has been one of the most important people in my life coming out of COVID. Part of it's just their bleeding authenticity, and they everything we just talked about is stuff that they think about and are still trying to bring that, some of that authenticity into their own music. And I know you have, but they just remember when I talk to them about their elders, when people in New York, especially when John had just started to pick the guitar back up again, they point to you as like the biggest inspiration. Not
huh.
because you were like, they didn't go home like, Michael Shreve, when he first saw Mahavishnu, Billy Cobham's power threw everybody up against the wall. But yet, and so some musicians wanted to quit. Michael Shreve looked at it and said, I'm not going to be that, and I'm okay. And when those guys would go to see you, they wouldn't go home feeling defeated or like, I want to quit my instrument. They were saying, I have to keep working harder, because that was, and even Roy Williams said that about you too. You know, you're
Morgan
rooting, you
Williams?
want Campilongo to get it across the finish line because it's himself. He's being himself, and that's what those guys want to be.
Well, you've mentioned guys that I have nothing but total respect for, and I'm totally flattered I made any impression on
Oh my
them.
dude, honestly, dude, I've been waiting to talk to you for a couple of years now because those guys, I mean, the first person out of their mouth is Jim Campilongo, and I think it has everything to do with what we've just talked about for the last 75 minutes. It's just it's not a snobatorium. Quite frankly, we're not there. It's not a riffology session with Campilongo. All this stuff, it's about Greece, it's about accessing the primordial gut, and it's about telling your story. And so that resonates. And sometimes, like you said, you're flattered because you know what? A lot of people, through no fault of their own, they'll never really tell you how they really feel about you. And that's kind of it. Sometimes that's a shame. But that's one reason I do my show. I've brought people that were not on speaking terms to be connected again. And if that, I feel like, to have the respect of cats like that, like John Lee and Zeph, like you've been doing the right thing for quite a while.
Well, thanks a lot. That's really nice of you to say, and brave too. So thanks, and it makes me want to call those guys.
You
You
should know. No, don't think text, call, just be like, hey, they know this interview is going down. They're fired up, but I'm just saying
know.
those two guys have been about as important coming, like you said, in this craving of comfort that we've come out of. Those uh both of those guys bring me comfort in uncomfortable situations. So we will pick up on all this because I also think I want to start with the idea of saying it's okay to be comfortable being uncomfortable. That's another part of the art of being on the bandstand. But they have really exuded that in the most graceful fashion. And when I talk to them, well, who are guys that you look up to? Campilongo, right at the top. I don't even know if there's anybody else.
Well, they could do better than that, but I'm
No,
really.
I mean, they have, and but they will not forget their roots either.
That's really nice. Thanks a
Yeah,
lot.
man. All right, I'll be in touch. We'll definitely do something in the next couple weeks. Okay, man.
Sounds great. I'm around.
It's great to hear you, brother. Thank you for taking the time.
You bet. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed talking. I'll talk to you soon, Jake. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely, brother. Be good.
Okay, you too. Bye bye.
Peace. Bye.